Today is our lunch break panel. It is Brad Polumbo. He is the host of the Based Politics podcast. He's a YouTuber. He's on X at Brad_Polumbo. And Vince August, comedian, former judge. I was waiting for it to say judge on American Idol or judge on America's Got Talent, but a real-life judicial judge, Vince August, who you can find on X and on YouTube. He's Vince August 21. What's up, guys? Glad to have you on the Will Cain Show.
Great to be here.
What's up, Will?
Vince, last Friday on Real Time, Ann Coulter issued what people have come to call Coulter's Law. And that was that we do not know the identities of the Kansas City Chiefs victory parade shooters. And that means they're not white. That if they were, we would know right away. The fact that we don't know confirms they're not white. Facts now have come out, and it turns out Ann Coulter was right. She was mocked, by the way, by Bill Maher and Van Jones. But as it turns out, she's right. The shooters in Kansas City, not white.
Well, there's a hierarchy. It's first, if it's white, we go right back to the inauguration speech, 2021, white supremacy is the biggest threat in our country at this time. If you have white with an AR-15, that's the bonus. So you got the Powerball as well as the numbers there, so you're hitting big. Once you start chipping away at that, once you lose AR-15, then the argument becomes a little bit weaker. If you lose white and AR-15, then it's don't report. The news cycle will get this out of the news quick enough, and we'll move on to it, because we've seen what now? The shooter down at Olstein's church was trans. We're going to bury that like the Tennessee shooter. This story, again, it doesn't fit a narrative. Get rid of it. And let's be honest. Whenever there's a shooting, the right is kind of, and when I talk about the right, I mean, the conservative right, is at a weak point because it's come after the guns, and it's hard to defend the shooting. And they never defend the shooting, they defend the legal gun owner's rights. So there's already a weaker argument there. But when it's the left, we have to make sure we can check the boxes we want to check, because the boxes have to be white supremacy, AR-15, and go down that list. If we can't check those boxes, get off the story.
Well, what you're pointing out, and I'll put this to you, Brad. So what's interesting is you said that in a little bit of a funny way there for a moment, Vince, but I know what you're getting at. You said, like, no one would defend the shooting. But you're right. If you're on the quote-unquote right, that's the box that you're put into because you are immediately painted as the bad guy. So it's not the shooter that's the bad guy. It's you that are the bad guy because you believe in the Second Amendment. Or gun owners, Second Amendment advocates, whatever it may be. Brad, like, I'm gonna say this, it's really bothered me. Like, I've had a friend for most of my life, and after the shooting in Uvalde, which was horrific, the text he sent me was like, how do I defend myself? Like, what do I need to defend myself from? I didn't do anything here. I didn't shoot anybody. I didn't advocate for this, but you've put me in the box in the same position, presumably, of the shooter. Like, how is this about me? And this is a lifelong friend.
Yeah, no, I get that concern, because I think the problem here is whenever you're using individual actions or circumstances, and then you're blaming collectives or entire groups. Like, we would all agree that, say that you're someone and you were mugged by a black person once. It's not okay to then look at a random black person and be like, oh, they must be dangerous. We'd all be like, that is bad. That's offensive. That's stereotyping. But when it runs in the other direction, when they're like, oh, white men are the biggest problems causing mass shootings, it's like suddenly okay to collectively assign guilt and blame on the basis of immutable demographic characteristics. I think that's horrific.
But hold on, Brad. But the only thing I'd push back, but I think you're just one step removed from actually what's happening. It's not simply because, listen, what you've described, Brad, is racism. It's taking the acts of one individual and applying it to a group as a collective, right? And racism is wrong, but racism is a natural condition of humanity to extrapolate in the pursuit of security. Okay, it doesn't make it right, but what it does is it reminds us we have to overcome those instinctual things and allow for individuality. But what Vince is describing is less like, my friend didn't text me because I'm white. He didn't text me because, by the way, the shooter in Uvalde wasn't white. I think he was Latino. But it's because I'm on the right. It's because I'm conservative. So it's like viewpoint extrapolation, which is also not accurate because who knows what that shooter's viewpoint is. It was removed all agency from the individuals, and it's just about, I have the wrong political opinion. So now somehow I'm responsible for Uvalde.
But I think it's because it's easier than arguing with your points or your positions. It's a smear job, right? It's like they don't want to have a debate about the facts of guns in America, whether their specific policies would have actually made any difference. It's easier to kind of go with an emotional blame narrative to try to discredit the opposition rather than argue with us and explain why we're wrong, because most of the facts aren't on their side. I mean, guns are used far more in self-defense in America than they are in violent crimes. And they don't want to grapple with the actual numbers or the realities or the fact that in many of these cases, these people were already legally prohibited from purchasing a gun and found a way to get one anyway. So it's easier for them to try to make it a blame game, it's the same way when they say like the NRA has blood on their hands, even though as far as I'm aware, no NRA member has ever committed a mass shooting. You might disagree with the NRA's positions, but you should argue with them. Instead, they do this ad hominem to try to discredit the position with the public rather than explain why it's wrong. I think it's really cheap, it's really divisive, and it's kind of corrosive to how our politics is supposed to work.
So before I go back to Vince, I want to go back to you on this then, Brad, really quick. How do you explain? So what we're talking about is how Vince, your explanation about the Powerball is perfect, actually. Like the necessary ingredients for press coverage are AR-15 and white man. Those are the elements that make a shooting meaningful to the media. If those elements are missing, it goes away. But then there's another step, which I'm going to put to you, Brad, and that is the step of totally hiding from us the details of a shooting. So in this case, look, it was two young black men. I don't know if it was gang related, but it was seemingly like they got into an argument at the parade and they quickly resorted to guns, is what we seem to know right now. But at first we were told, well, you didn't get to know their identity because they're juveniles. They're not juveniles. That's false. Like, it's a lie. Like, one of them's 18 or 19, and the other is 22 or 23. The two that have been arrested and charged with second-degree murder. So we're seeing a whole different thing play out now of not just, hey, here's the Powerball ticket number of stories we want to run with, but now we've got some elements. We actually want to make the story go away. We want to hide the story, Brad.
It's because they're approaching these stories in mainstream media and analyzing whether they're useful to pursue an agenda. And as soon as it comes out that it's not a loner white male with an AR-15 or these other necessary preconditions to push their ideological agenda, it is useless and in fact actually hurts their agenda, right, in different ways. So that's why they don't want to cover it. That's why they don't want to press for the information to be released in a more timely manner. And I think it's just that's the fundamental problem with the approach, is they're not looking at these incidents as what is the news value. They're looking at it as what is the political value. And they've kind of conflated those two things successfully in their own minds and in the public perceptions over the last decade or so. But it's not how the news is supposed to work.
Vince?
Well, the other aspect of this is you have to remember what media is. It's very visual. So when you have the visual of a white supremacist, a thought immediately comes to mind, and they usually look like me, which is not good for me. But there's also the other visual, the AR-15, which looks like a really scary gun. And as a gun owner, I can tell you right now, if you came to me and said, we can have your Springfield M1 or your AR-15, I'd say you can take my AR-15. My M1 is a lot more accurate and it's a lot more dangerous because of the caliber of the bullet and how far it could shoot. The other aspect then is the visual that we have, which is what these shooters look like and where we are right now and what the big story is right now, which is immigration. And if the shooters look like the thing that is the other aspect of the news right now that we're trying to not make a big deal out of, well, that's a lot of overlap. And you know what? We got to make that story go away because it kind of gives credence to the side. So rather than just deal with this as a shooting, it starts to layer in every other aspect of the news, and it becomes this layering thing. And it's to separate those layers for the people that want to have a narrative. That's way too much work. So you know what? Just bury it, because then we're going to have to get into all of the other aspects.
It is interesting that one of those Powerball ingredients, as you've talked about, is the AR-15, because to your point, Brad, like, the news is not to relay information, but to further a political agenda. Why is the AR-15 so important? Why is it part of the political agenda? Its contribution to annual shootings is minuscule. Like, is it 4%? I'm not even sure if it's 4% of, like, if there's 40,000 shootings in a year, it's tiny.
There are so many millions of AR-15s that 99.99% of them are never used to kill anybody.
Yeah.
It's the last gun I'm grabbing in my house.
And that's why a conservative always looks at this conversation as dishonest. It's like, look, what 90% probably? I'm guessing at this, but I'm a gun owner. I know some things about guns my whole life. 90% semi-automatic handguns, revolvers too. I mean, handguns. And so, like, if you're truly trying to make a dent in violence through the mechanism of gun control, forgive me if I don't see you heading towards the direction of everything, because everything is virtually everything is semi-automatic, right? Like, of course,
it'd be more honest
rifles
if
and
they
bolt
said,
actions
"Yeah,
and
we need
shotguns.
to repeal the Second Amendment and collect all the guns," because they pretend they just want this piecemeal reform, like just this here or this that, but even they can't truly believe that would make much of a difference. I mean, the countries they talk about favorably don't just have, tighter background checks. They just ban all of this stuff and forcibly did buybacks and all this other stuff. So there is a alarming degree of dishonesty and also unfamiliarity with these subject matters.
Yeah,
like, I'm not a huge gun person, but I at least know the difference between an automatic rifle and a semi-automatic rifle. But the number of times you hear a newscaster or a Democratic politician say automatic rifle when what they mean is semi-automatic, which are totally different things, it just betrays a profound ignorance of the thing they're claiming to want to ban or regulate. And it's like, you should probably at least be familiar with the basics. I love how media is obsessed with all forms of diversity, except only the ones that show up on the census. Not like, how many gun owners do we have in this newsroom? How many people who were born in red states do we have? How many people who go to church? These are more meaningful kinds of diversity than what box you check on the census. And the lack of it shows up in the coverage.
So, Vince, Bill Maher on his show last week said, as an aside, a joke, that he wouldn't choose Joe Biden as his Squid Game partner. Now, I'm not going to presume that everybody watching and listening knows Squid Game, but I think it was a Korean show. I can't remember if it was Korean or Japanese show. Forgive me.
Korean.
I watched it dubbed.
Korean.
Thank you. I watched it dubbed on Netflix. Didn't pick up the underlying language or culture, apparently, so that's on me. But Squid Games, good show, by the way, fun show. And the idea was people were all put into basically a Hunger Games style event. They die. The winner gets all their debt paid, a certain amount. I think the number climbed by every time someone else died. But people partnered up through it for a while. They partnered up to arrive at the end to survive the other contestants. And Bill Maher said, I wouldn't want to partner up with Joe Biden, which leads me to this, Vince. Who in D.C. would you choose as your partner in the Squid Games?
All right, if I can go a little bit out of D.C., it's RFK Jr. because he's jumping on the floor doing push-ups every opportunity he gets. If I can't have him, I'm going Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is in shape, former military. She's constantly training. Then I have a woman on my team so she can get into smaller places. I can't. I'm telling you, Gabbard, August, you're not beating us. Gabbard, RFK Jr., you're not beating this team. You're not beating us.
I think we can, Brad. He left some Navy SEALs on the table for you.
Yeah, so the hard thing is that you have to beat him at the end, right? Because a part of me just wants to go for like...
That's the key I was going to say, Brad. Vince, you've made him... I don't know. Are you going to beat Tulsi in a fight 1v1 when it comes down to you and Tulsi? You need somebody, just to Brad's point, good enough to get you along, but not better than you.
You can't teach speed. Tulsi's got speed.
My
Go ahead,
pick
Brad.
is Dan Crenshaw, and part of me, if this is a little offensive, but like he's got the military training, right? He's got the military background, and I think he'd help me get to the end. I think he's got the smarts and the know-how, but then there's
Where are you going
advantages
with
that I
this?
would have over him that maybe I could use to get it over him in the end.
Oh, I don't know what you're saying. What are you saying, Brad? What advantages do you have over a former Navy SEAL?
I don't know.
Are you saying you're going to sneak up on his blind side?
Yes,
What
that
are
is
you
exactly
saying?
what I'm saying.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you something, Brad. I'm taking Dan Crenshaw with one eye over you with both eyes. I'm sorry. I don't think you're going to. I don't think you're sneaking up on him. Now, I don't know if there's other
probably
SEALs.
right.
I think there. I don't know how many SEALs there are in Congress in D.C. right now. Tim Sheehy's running for senator in Montana. Ryan Zinke was. I can't. There's a lot. Morgan Luttrell in Texas. I don't know. There's a lot of them. But your analysis is right. We got to pick somebody. This is why I may go back with Vince on this. Certainly, Vince made a better selection than you, Brad. Less offensive and more accurate. Is I'm going to go with RFK that I've got to play the age card. I mean, he's jacked. I don't know if I could take him. But, I mean, could he blow out an ACL trying to wrestle me to the ground? Age has to catch up at some point. I don't know if he's on HGH or what's going on. And I'm not saying RFK. I'm not saying. But I'm just saying I don't see. How old is he? 60s? I don't see many 60-year-olds looking like RFK.
And I don't see him injecting anything, including steroids. So if he's not taking vaccines, he's not taking HGH.
So, Vince, how old are you?
I'm 54.
Okay. Brad, how old are you?
I'm 26.
All right, let's go with Brad on this, although his cohorts have not yet arrived at the disposable income necessary to probably invest in this. What percentage of your friends, Brad, are on testosterone, HGH, or Ozempic?
You know, not many, because I don't live in like the city. So I live in a small city, but I think when I lived in DC, if I still lived there, the answer would be a lot higher. But I know a couple guys that I play soccer with who are clearly on something, but I would say not a ton, to be honest, out here in West Michigan.
So, Vince, you are in the disposable income bracket, and you are actually in the target market now that I think about it. Like, dudes that start taking testosterone, early 50s.
Well, I'm going to tell you this. Little known fact about me. Former powerlifting champion. I was actually ranked number one New York Times 1991 powerlifter. I am right now in Orlando getting ready to run 5K, 10K half marathon back to back. I've never taken a drug in my life. That's why.
As a powerlifter?
Yeah, never did it. That's why Team August RFK Gabbard is just, you can't beat this team. You can't. There's no vaccines in us. There's nothing. There's no chemicals at play here.
I'll just cough on you.
This is guerrilla warfare, spelled actually Gorilla.
All right, last topic. He's back. Jon Stewart is back. You know, what do you think will be the influence to both of you on this? We'll go with Brad first. What do you think? You're really young, Brad, so you may have not experienced the full effect of Jon Stewart through the political process. If I'd have asked you this question a decade ago, how influential and impactful will he be on a presidential election? The answer was probably very substantially impactful and influential. You're young, so I don't know that you ever experienced that, but he's back. And I think the first thing that I notice is, look, he's funny. Okay, that's the bottom line. He is way, way, way better than Trevor Noah, and I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to be like like I am when I talk about sports or anything. Like, he's way better than Trevor Noah.
It's not particularly close. I've seen Trevor Noah in person, and he's not funny. Now, I think the extent to which it could have an effect is that Jon Stewart is still extremely popular with the millennial cohort, and they do look to him. And Biden is struggling with young voters who lean Democrat but are extremely dissatisfied with his failure to deliver on student debt bailouts. They really disagree with his support for Israel, other things. They're really dissatisfied with him. And a lot of them are talking about voting for like Cornel West and the Green Party or other options. And I think to see Jon Stewart already calling out the elephant in the room and being like, Biden is not fit, basically, I think that will resonate. And I don't know if there's any getting off this train. It may be too late for Democrats to actually avert disaster and avert putting up this guy who's clearly not fit to run again. But if anybody can influence enough of the base to just not be interested in showing up for this uninspiring candidate, I think he could make a significant difference on that front with younger, under 35 voters.
What do you think, Vince?
All right. Well, I have to first off clear out my bias right away because I toured with Trevor Noah from 2018 until 2023. So I know Trevor very, very well. We're friends. I also know Jon Stewart very well, and I have a relationship with The Daily Show. So let me get that out there. Jon and Trevor you really can't compare them because they're two completely different comedians. Trevor comes from an international voice. Jon, comes from his voice, which came after really 9/11, and they both do two very different things. What Jon does is he makes fun of the news and news coverage, and what we saw the last two shows was a masterclass at how to do that with comedy. I think the problem you have right now in general in society is people want to hear what they want to hear to either bolster their position, give them more information to support their position, or somehow tell them they're right. And the thing with Jon, and we saw it in the first episode, he's going to bring funny. And if the funny goes after what those things go against, so if he does attack Joe Biden's age, then that audience, we know what happens right now. They shut it out. They don't want to hear it. So that, people want to live in their vacuum. In terms of the people that are in the middle, whether or not that comedic voice is going to get them to sway one way or another politically, I think that middle voice is smarter than the extremes that are already married to their positions. And I think they can see through it as humor and not necessarily as a news source. So I think he brings a great form of entertainment that we're missing. I don't know that he's necessarily going to move the needle in terms of actually, hey, look, here's what you guys should do in terms of voting.
Well, my only response to that is Jon Stewart speaks to the center left. I think that is actually the audience that listens to him and either receives confirmation bias or gathers their style of arguing. And Jon Stewart has done some good things. And what he's done for 9/11 victims and first responders is incredibly commendable. I also think he had a negative contribution to our political discourse. And because he does it with a smile and through comedy, people don't see the negativity. But he reduced many of that center left to thinking that sneering and snarkiness is an argument, and it's not an argument. And I think debate is dead. Like, I invite, honestly, sometimes, unless they're a Fox News contributor, Brad, you're as close as I get to disagreement, and you're a libertarian. I welcome anybody onto this show, anyone, but no one wants to have that interaction anymore. The left considers any kind of platforming and argument an act of malevolence and vice. And I think that Jon Stewart's helped contribute to that with his dismissive behavior to the argument of the other side. And by the way, I don't know. Actually, I think most of the right is more willing to debate. I think that...
I agree. No, I do.
Maybe not every Fox... What's that?
I agree.
What'd you say, Brad?
I found the right much more willing to debate the things where there's debate within the right than the left is to question any sacred cow.
And that's not all Jon Stewart. That's a lot of things that have contributed to that. But I do think he helped create this world that, sneering and snarkiness and condescending dismissal wave of the hand through a joke is a way to win. And so he's back. And I'm worried that may be reinforced on the center left because he's really good at what he does. I mean, this is the compliment. I don't like what he accomplishes it, but he's really good at it, and I think he could accomplish it for the center left, Brad.
I agree. I will say that I think coming back to The Daily Show is going to be better. I watched some of what he did on Apple TV, and it was horrible. It was extremely bad faith, deceptively edited dunk interviews with Republicans, other stuff that just really didn't seem to have any nuance or really open to what the other side was saying, just trying to dunk on them or humiliate them. But I think we've already seen with his return to The Daily Show more of a willingness to punch in both directions than we ever saw with him on Apple TV, really, at least in the episodes that really made a splash or got noticed. So I don't know. I think it's it will all depend for me on to what extent he's willing to poke left and question things where even many rank and file people on the left know that they've gone a bit nuts, whether it's the trans stuff or the border or other things, or just pretending Biden is, not at all lost a step. These things that are just obviously untrue on his own side. For me, whether this has an interesting and valuable impact, his return, will come down to how much he actually focuses on partially pointing out those things. If he just dunks on Trump all the time, I mean, it won't add a lot of unique value.
Last word to his good friend Vince.
I think that what you pointed on there, Will, is there's a couple things with the lack of debate. And I think center-right people live in the center-right because that's where they are. I think far-right people live in the far-right because that's where they are. I think the center-left people are where they are because they've been pushed there by the far left, because one of the things that's also lost in debate seems to be on the left, where if you don't agree with us on everything, then you're not with us at all. And what happened is you start getting pushed further and further towards the middle because you do lose some of the agreement. Like, I know people on the right, when it comes to an issue like abortion, that when they look at elections, they're like, guys, we got to drop this. This is where we lose. Whereas on the left, if you start talking about limits and things like that, they kind of push you away. Because I look at where I was in the 80s, and I was considered a Democrat liberal because I was against wars. I haven't moved, but somehow, some way, I am now QAnon to the same people that agreed with me. And it's like, wait a minute, what the hell happened here? I didn't move. You people are shuffling around me, and now all of a sudden I'm sitting at the end of the right row because you moved chairs further to the left. So I think that's a big distinction where there's a loss of debate. It's not just right with left. It's within the faction, and especially on the left.
Yeah, that's really well put. I thought you were going to say center right. You jumped all the way to QAnon. That's good. All right, Vince August, check him out. Comedian, former judge, Brad Polumbo, host of the Based podcast. I have that right, Brad?
Yeah.
You're based?
Base politics. Brad? That's the slang. That's the Gen Z slang.
Did libertarians use based? I didn't think that was a libertarian thing, based.
Well, we did original. It kind of has become co-opted a little bit, but we're reclaiming it.
Okay. All right. Based podcast. There you go. Based politics podcast. All right. I really appreciate both of you jumping on. Always do. Thank you so much for being on the Will Cain Show.
Thanks.
Thanks, Will.